Actually, Cédric and I have a common point. We were in school together. I'm sure he doesn't remember me, but I do remember him because he was already dressing like he is right now. So he was a very visible presence in the school. So I also got into that school as a mathematician. Actually, I was more of an analyst. I ended up doing a PhD in algebra and actually in arithmetic geometry, working on the Fermat theorem. But one of your compatriots actually solved the problem, so I was out of a job. But at that time, I actually, being at school, there was a lot of exposure to other fields, and I started studying philosophy and actually cognitive science, and decided to change field and go in AI a long time before it was fashionable. And so I went to the US at Carnegie Mellon, where I started to do some research in AI at the time. And then from there, because the US is always a very entrepreneurial place, I actually decided to start a company. So the past 20 years, I've been involved in AI, mostly actually on the entrepreneur side rather than the research side. And I've been involved with a couple of startups. I've been involved with IBM when they started kind of the AI commercialization trend. And I actually just recently took a new job at Facebook where I'm going to lead the AI worldwide. So that's a scoop. So what I thought I would do today is tell you a little bit more about the review. I'd like to kind of tell you a little bit of the premise of the review, how we approach the problem. Tell you some of the conclusion, giving you some examples of the recommendation. We made actually 18 recommendations. Give you a little bit of an update on where it is today, because actually what really matters is not the documents and the implementation. And then talk a little bit about maybe some advice for Cédric and his team, what we've learned. There obviously is different governments. I had no experience in government, so I'm sure now you go much better than me how it works. I still haven't figured it out. And then maybe talk a little bit about this Franco-English collaboration, because actually a lot of the recommendations we make, they sound a little bit like, this is a competition, worldwide competition, who is going to come on top. But actually, most of the recommendations we make are not a zero-sum game. Actually, there's really ways for multiple countries to benefit from having a common approach. So let me go for that. First, around the premises. So the premise is, obviously having been in AI for quite a while, I don't believe the current hype is just a hype. Now, I was one of the people, maybe longer than that, 15, 17 years ago, where we were joking about deep learning, and it was not called deep learning at the time, neural networks, like, you just invite a couple of people at the conference just to be nice to them, but nobody really paid attention. Now, obviously, I'm going to work with Yann Lequin in one of the best AI team out there, and I'm eating my words. So I don't believe it's hype. Now, do I believe that we're going to get Skynet anytime soon? No, I don't believe so. I think we're very far. There's a lot of scare, and I wish, because I have been trying to create system actually useful, that we were closer to Skynet than we are. Now, it doesn't work that well. A lot of non-solved problem. But I do believe it's here to stay. And the best comparison I will have is, think of the internet in the early days, maybe 97, 98. I do believe that at some point we may go through a correction in terms of the investments. The money right at this point is flowing really very, very easily. That may get a correction at one point, but I do believe that AI is going to stay. And it's going to stay a little bit like, think of the mobile revolution, or think of the internet revolution. In 20 years from now, if you are a developer, like today, you can't be a software developer without thinking of the internet or thinking of mobile. I do believe that 20 years from now, and that's something things we're actually thinking even at Facebook, that the way to program and the way machine learning is a handle will be an integral part of every kind of programmer's task, every day. So it's going to stay, it's going to be around, and it's going to be part of kind of every industry and part of every software engineer's work. Okay. I also believe that, and that's one of the premise of the review, we didn't actually really come up with the numbers, and you can see the numbers that we quoted from, I think they were from Accenture, that it will have a major economic impact. And it will allow industry to change and to grow, and it will actually have an impact such that it will reshuffle the winners and losers in each industry. It will have a tremendous impact in each industry where the people are adopting these kind of techniques. And you can think of the techniques as being AI if you want to think very far ahead, but you can think of the techniques as being in some way data science or big data or machine learning, so that when you make decisions, or you try to define parameters in a problem, you actually learn it from the data rather than making a judgment call. I do believe this will actually change a lot of industries, and the main player, the industry the players in the industries who will actually adopt this kind of strategy, this kind of techniques will come ahead. And the countries potentially that will actually adopt this kind of technology and really, have the best people and the best industry around this will maybe come on top. In terms of the review, our premises were first, we focus on industrial growth. So maybe a counterpoint to what Cédric was saying, we didn't think we had enough breadth to actually go to all the different topics. It doesn't mean they're not important. Obviously, the ethical aspect of AI are very important. Not in the way of worrying about robots taking over, okay, because it's not going to happen. Even in the dubious ways, are robots really going to take over jobs? I think it's an interesting question, but I don't think it's as dramatic as people think of it. But there are actually really interesting ethical aspects around, how do you explain the algorithm, and especially around biases. When you create a system that's data-driven, well, the system may very well reproduce the bias that it has learned from the data, and that's a problem that's very important to study, and it's very important for the industry. But we didn't want to do a bad job around ethics, so we focus on kind of the positive aspect and around industrial growth. Okay. The other aspect that we decided to do is to be very, very pragmatic and take it as a starting point. And my experience with government, actually, it may be a good idea to do that. So you get a package that actually can be implemented very quickly, rather than being too ambitious and you never get out of the gate. So now we came up with conclusion, 18 recommendations, and these recommendations were around 4 different aspects. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, is AI is actually really, about data, and the whole industry that's creating around is an industry creating around data. So I'm actually in a very interesting position right now, and my new employer may be mad at my recommendations, but I was obviously in a startup, actually based in London, and the challenge for a startup in that space is data, right? Access to data. When you have a few players, obviously Facebook and Google being 2 of them, having access to a disproportionate amount of data. And so our view is that you really need to kind of level the playing field. Our view, as my co-chair as the AI review, not as part of Facebook, but that's something I will discuss actually with the leadership there, is that you want to kind of level the playing field, and you want to create mechanisms for people to share data in a better way. So we came up with this concept of the data trust, and the idea, the simplest data trust, is to facilitate and remove friction around data sharing. It's actually quite complicated to share data. If you have to share data today, you basically have to pay big bucks to lawyers because you most likely will craft contract. Let's say if you're a government entity and want to share data with a small startup, you will have to come up with some kind of contract, and most likely you will start from scratch, okay? And it's very expensive to do that, and there are a lot of complexity around data. Now, the challenge around this, you'll think, oh, okay, let's create one way for all the government to share data. That's not possible either, because data has many, many characteristics. It changes a lot. It has different level of protections, of privacy. So it's hard to do a one-size-fits-all. But what we thought is, try to start a mechanism so people will share data better. So we came up with this concept of data trust. Initially, the idea is to have a small organization within the government, which actually is being created at the moment, to facilitate this transaction around data within the government. Take a few use cases, again, very pragmatic. Take a few use cases, run them, and craft the agreement around that. Then once you craft a few agreements, figure out what templates you find, and try to find these patterns below these agreements so that you can actually have a template you can reuse, okay? Down the line, though, and this is why we actually call the concept data trust, the idea could be to have this idea of, if I give you the data, okay, I trust you to use you in a certain way. In the same way that you have this concept of money trust, where you put the money somewhere and you set the rules as to how it's going to be used. So we do believe that down the line there will be a concept, which could be data trust, where data will flow in and you will kind of keep control by saying, I will give the data to this data trust under the condition it's managed by a trustee with the spirit that's initiated in the trust, okay? Anyway, so it's a whole plan to go from, facilitating this kind of contract in the government to finding this template, crafting this template, having people able to actually run these templates in a repeated way, and then potentially use a legal structure, which is data trust, to put the template as the rules of using the data so that people, when they actually give you access to their data, know where it's going and how it's going to be used. So that was really a big topic for us. We felt we couldn't really approach that. It's not necessarily limited to AI, but data is really critical to AI, and we thought we couldn't really ignore the elephant in the room, and we need to find ways to make data sharing easier. Now, the second elephant in the room, which was really, really easy, to come up with, is around skills. So that's actually the irony, if you think of AI, is that the big battle today around AI is around people, okay? And you think, a system that's, threatened to replace people will not be about people, but it's all about talent. And the industry and the startups will be, and the investments will happen where the best talent is, okay? And actually, a very good example of that is what's happening recently around Canada, okay? So, two of the three main leaders around deep learning happen to be, actually two of the three happen to be French, but two of the three happen to live in Canada, okay? One in Toronto and one in Montreal. And that created really a hub there for skills. And level of investment now in Canada. Canada is really on the map for AI just because of that talent pool. So it's a very interesting, important aspect. And what we found, actually, and also being part of the companies trying to hire, is that there's a huge battle for talent at the moment. Actually, the salaries are going completely off the roof. If you have kids and they're worrying where they want to go, tell them to go to a master's or PhD in machine learning. At the moment, it's really worth it. Maybe in 10 years it won't anymore, but at the moment I can tell you it's absolutely worth it. So there's a bit of a problem of supply of skills. And so one of the schemes we came up with, which I think is clever, actually suggested by Demis Ashabi, who obviously is a key figure here, was to get the industry to pay for some of this education. And so we came up with a scheme around a master's degree where the industry is ready actually to pay for the tuition for hundreds of masters every year, potentially down the line 1,000, and then create this prestigious masters where industry will actually pay. And then in return, we'll get these master students as intern through a matching algorithm. So we do believe you can find these clever things because there's such a scarcity of skills at the moment that industry is really ready to help do that. So one example was that, was around master. Another one was to actually increase the number of PhDs. Okay, so the goal down the line, that was actually a very interesting discussion with government as to how many. I don't even know, Ben, who actually helped me here, he's in the room, craft the report. We had this back and forth with government. So how many PhDs should we advise to increase, the PhD pool? So I think we came up with a number which is right now around 450. But I've been, the main criticism I had around the AI review is too small. But I will tell you that we made it 3,000 at some point, and then the government told us to decrease the number, and then another part of the government told us to increase the number, and another part of the government to tell us to decrease the number. So we went back and forth like this many times. We ended up putting 450 in the recommendation, and I think a few thousand in the subtext to say that actually we want to grow there. Obviously, one of the problems is you need to train all these people. Okay, it's not that easy. So you also need to go upstream and actually bring the talent here to actually train these people. So we actually decided also that the government should fund a high level of fellowship and try to attract the best talent. And this fellowship, actually, we recommended they will be handled and get actually the name of Turing and handled by the Turing Institute. So that actually has been accepted. And the idea is to create a set of fellowship here to get people who can train the PhDs and the masters, and then create the next generation of people who can train this. So create this virtuous circle of AI skills. So that was the second kind of key set of recommendation around skills. The third was around AI research. One of the aspects of that was actually to make Turing the institute for AI, and because we had seen that even in, again, imitating what other countries had done. Well, first, actually, in some way, with a name like Turing, okay, you got to be associated with AI, okay? And when Turing was created, actually, it's like me. I was more involved with, at that point, my title, I think, was like something around big data, but, the terms evolve. I do believe that AI is here to stay, but I think it was natural for Turing to go from data science to AI. And again, I don't think these two things are very segmented. They're part of the same continuum. So, but we really thought it was a good idea for Turing and for that brand to own, kind of to be the key institute for AI in the UK, in the same way that, for example, Canada is creating the Vector Institute. And I do believe that for collaboration, it will be interesting that you have a single point so that you can actually do cross-national collaboration. So that was kind of, we had a set of recommendations around AI research. And the fourth, set of recommendations were around trying to, facilitate the uptake of AI, both in the public sector and the private sector and the industry. And so we actually suggested first to create an AI council that combines, government, academia, and industry, so that actually the recommendation that we do will continue, and then we can start actually using them to create kind of challenges around AI within the government and within industry to facilitate the kind of, one of the challenges of AI is that it's a great set of technologies, but there are very few people who understand how they can be applied, understand the application domain, but also understand what they can actually do. It's very easy to dream about AI, and having been part of IBM and Watson, I can tell you a lot of people who were dreaming things that could not happen. And so if you actually make the expectation way too high, it's difficult to actually find good application. But so we came up with a set of recommendations to kind of facilitate around a set of challenges, and especially using the concept of the data trust around data, the application of AI in specific industry, and especially make the government a very good consumer of AI. Anyway, I encourage you to go read the recommendation or read the report. You don't need to read the whole thing. You can just look at the recommendation. I think it's an easy read. What I've learned, through this, I think what we did is we tried to be very, very quick and very pragmatic. And I'm glad to hear that Cédric plan to do the same thing and focus on the steps. What is the next step that the government is going to pursue? If you're too theoretical, then government kind of starts to be a little bit paralyzed. What's the next step? What's going to happen? And you kind of get a report that may actually just sit on the shelf, out there. So I think it's very important to think of implementation. So at the moment, we are actually going into implementation phase. Ironically, I think the report was so well received that at the moment it's almost costing us some time. Let me explain. So the government decided to make the review and the recommendation a sector deal, which was great, and it was announced as part of the industrial strategy. But by making it a bigger thing than it was, then you get more scrutiny, and you get tied to other, dynamics. So now we have to kind of, go in the process of making it a formal sector deal, which is this agreement between industry and government on how we're going to push that. So it's a great outcome, but it means, to my taste, of it slowing down the process. I'd like to be right to this. But there have been actually signs that things are moving on. We are working right now, putting a team together to push the data trust idea. So they will actually be, the funds have been approved to set up some civil servants to actually explore the idea and start implementing, find the use cases and start implementing this kind of contracts between multiple parties to share data. So that's actually going well. I believe the budgets have already been discussed and somewhat approved around the fellowship. The PhDs will be handled by UKRI, and also the idea of the masters is sponsored by the industry, and we have actually commitments from many companies to finance that. So there again, making good progress. Turing has been embracing the dynamic here. You have heard it. They already changed their mission to include AI, and they also, one of our recommendations was to expand the set of universities under the Turing umbrella, and I believe there was an announcement just a week ago around that. So that's a great outcome. And the AI Council is being created. So things are moving along. Being an entrepreneur, I wish it would go much faster, but at least it's some progress. What I find interesting about all these recommendations is that they're not, again, they're not competition between countries. Think of the different aspects. Data trust, if you get a concept and a model for sharing data, where that data doesn't have boundaries, and so if you could get it adopted across countries, it would be much better. Obviously, skills also these days don't have borders. They tend to be very fluid and go around. And so when countries create new skills, it kind of help everybody push the agenda. And I think it was very interesting to discuss the flow of skills between the two countries. And creating and making Turing an AI institute will allow actually to have a lot of collaboration. That's what we have today between the two countries around AI. So on this, I think we're going to have some panels to discuss this topic, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.